Hello and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone around the world, depending on where you're from. Thanks for spending an hour with us today to learn about innovations and growth in the space of the enterprise data fabric. I'm very excited to be sharing the virtual stage today with my friend and colleague, Noel Yuhanna, Vice President and Principal Analyst at Forrester Research, who's been doing some really groundbreaking and important research in the space of data fabric, which you'll hear a lot about today. A brief introduction of myself. I'm Ben Seckley, Senior Vice President and co-founder of Cambridge Semantics. Have really enjoyed the interaction and collaboration we've had with Noel and his teams over the last several years around data fabric and maybe more recently in the application of semantic and graph technologies there. And so without further ado, I'll hand it over to Noel to give us the state of the world with data fabric today.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks for inviting me on this webinar. It's great to talk about data fabric strategy. At Forrester, we've been doing a lot of research on data fabric for a few years now, I guess, and we believe it's a critical, important framework which people need to embrace, especially as they're building this data and analytics strategies in their organizations. And and data and strategy, data and analytics strategy is become critical, I guess, for every organization, especially during this pandemic. We hear a lot of customers asking more about, what kind of strategies are being developed, which is the best practices to follow, especially for these newer emerging use cases. So I'll talk more about some of these scenarios, what people are building. So let's begin. I guess the whole notion is that during the start of this year, right, we would have never imagined that we would run into a pandemic during the course of this year. It has changed our lives. It has even changed how we work, right? Having all of us work from home, right, did require some adjustments. But based on the feedback we've been getting from a lot of these customers, they have adjusted towards this work process and definitely working in a more efficient manner now than when we started off this pandemic. For me, I used to travel a lot, actually. Every other week I was traveling, but obviously now I got adjusted with this newer way of dealing with these scenarios, At Forrester, we kind of classify this pandemic in 3 phases. The first phase earlier this year was there was not much awareness going on. There was not much social distancing going on, and hence there was a rapid spread of this pandemic. Phase 2 came along, right, from March until May, and this where social distancing was enforced. There was a stay-at-home mandate which controlled a lot of the virus itself. And this phase 3 we are currently in is called this management phase. And this management phase defines the ways of travel and going to restaurants and moving around, right? We have seen firms creating their own systems to maintain the workforce health as well, right? And then this final phase we are going to eventually get into sooner or later of eradication of this phase 4 is when the vaccine gets available, right? And we call it April, but obviously sooner happens the better, I guess, But while the pre-pandemic conditions are not likely to return immediately, there will definitely be some consumer buying and organizational management change to create a new normal for these kind of scenarios, So definitely, there's different phases we are in, and when we speak to customers, definitely they're looking at these scenarios as to how we can, build and maintain their workforce and deploy them, more efficiently. The whole notion is every organization I speak to obviously are under pressure. well, most organizations, if not all. There is a budget cut of at least 10% or more for many companies. But we don't see the impact as much on data and analytics strategies. People are still investing a lot in that because real-time insights are critical, right? I mean, you still have to invest. So obviously, we see cuts on maybe in server and hardware. But for data and analytics strategies, definitely we've seen a lot of investments going on by companies. So this is definitely a difference in where things are. And I speak to all these retailers and healthcare and banks and insurance companies and manufacturing companies. And they tell us that data and analytics strategy is one of the most important on the top of the list for them. And data fabric, which I'll talk more about, is something which they are definitely starting to leverage more aggressively this year. If you look at it from a perspective of data, right? I mean, data is a new business asset, right? I mean, in fact, 51% based on a survey are commercializing data. They're making money out of the data. You can buy and sell data today. There's a lot of people kind of buying and selling data today, right? And it's become critical to any business for growth and innovation, right? It's the new oil, it's the new currency. And without data, I think organizations can't survive, right? In fact, some of these companies like retailers and healthcare, and they're turning around this whole platforms, focusing more on data just because it can drive not only insights, but also help customers and their partners to work more efficiently with data as well, right? In fact, if you look at it, there's more than 12 zettabytes, and I think like zettabytes are like 21 zeros. It won't probably fit into my iPhone, I guess, but 21 zeros. It's a lot of data there, I mean, and the bigger problem is that this data is not being leveraged by organizations to drive new insights. Traditionally, we have done ERP systems and CRM systems and all, and that's what the data was all about, right? And that's what we used to use in the data warehouses. But today, to drive customer intelligence, customer 360, some of these new emerging use cases, you need to get data from many different sources as well, right? Not just ERP systems. So definitely more data is good because you can drive better insights. And as we know it, data is locked into many different applications and silos, and all of these different, not only on premises, right? But you also have different dimensions of data coming in. We got databases, we got data warehouse data, we got files, we got other types of information as well, right? And all of these are silos which creates a bigger mess because you can't really tie them together in getting a 360-degree view of that information, right? And this is the biggest challenge which organizations are running into it, right? Imagine 10 years ago, you had a lot less databases and files. What about today? It's a lot different, right? You got a lot more of these databases and files. In fact, one financial services company was mentioning to me, they got about 35,000. Yeah, that's right, 35,000 databases in the organization. Trying to integrate them can be a nightmare itself, right? So, well, imagine, where we are in this situation, in these environments, that how do you blend this data together, right? And the worst thing is that now people are heading toward the cloud. You got all this multi-cloud, AWS and Google and Azure platforms, requiring data to be stored there, right, as well. We got all these social media data, Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn and others as well, right? We got Salesforce data, and we got all these data sets as well. Now, not all data is sitting in the cloud, right? You also have sometimes on premises. You have also is in the cloud. And still you want a single view of that information, right? How do you do that, right? And that's a bigger challenge in the industry today. So people are definitely facing a different kind of challenge than what we've done maybe 10 years ago, right? Where people only had everything on premises and we had only very few number of systems in place, right? So if you look at it in the traditional architectures, data on the left-hand side, you see this business value, right, on the left-hand side. You've got the positive and the negative side on the left-hand side. And then on the right-hand side, you see the time to value or time to action. And as the data gets originated, created, you need to really perform analytics right away. If you don't do that, the business value of that kind of diminishes, right? And if you look at legacy platforms, they often deliver those outdated insights and poor decision making from these, insights you create, I guess, and some of them could be harmful, actually. Imagine running analytics which are almost like a month old, right? That's too far. What if I want to do analytics on live data, right, on real-time data? And this is where this trend is going, right? I mean, this is where we speak to companies like in the financial services and retailers and healthcare. This is where they're investing in, getting towards a platform which is more real-time, gearing towards faster insights, right, of all data. And this is definitely where this direction is going to go. But obviously, we need a newer platform for doing this because traditional platforms are not good enough. Now, if you look at it, Customer 360, I think, is one of the top most use case out there in every vertical industry I come across. And if you look at it in a Customer 360 scenario, when we deal with a customer, you have to look at all these different things of data. We interact with them, right? We are calling, they are dealing with customer support data, chat data. You're also doing with marketing data, merchandise data. You got also campaigns running. You got social data. Twitter, some of your customers may be on Twitter and talking about you guys, right, about your products, right? So all of this data, and then we got sales data as well, right? I mean, transactional data as well, right? You got transactional data, you got system of record, and other type of data as well, right? So all of these have to be blended in as well, right? And the problem is that with all this variation of data, we can't really get a single version of the truth because of these different silos and different pieces of the puzzle. In trying to do this, right? And this is definitely requires a newer architecture as well. And as I mentioned, what businesses need is this new approach to connecting disparate data in real time to supporting various application insights and analytics, right? The number of connections we are going to be getting into for each and every organization in terms of number of data points that need to be connected is growing every day, because we are dealing with so many different types of sources of data, so many different types of environments today. Blending them together requires a newer system as well. So, Fabric, the data fabric, this is something which Forrester coined this term almost, I think, 5 years ago. I think, yeah, so 4.5, 5 years ago. And this came across when we were interviewing a lot of customers, and they were building these fabric-like architectures because traditional architectures weren't really driving the results they needed, right? And what is a fabric, right? A fabric actually is dynamically. That's the word, very important. Dynamic is a very important word there. Orchestrating disparate data sources, and intelligently and securely in a self-service manner. Self-service is a very important keyword as well there. And leveraging various platforms to drive or deliver integrated, trusted data to support various application analytics and use cases. Now, what's interesting about this scenario is that you're building this layer of abstraction, and I'll talk more about this architecture, but you're building this abstracted layer above all these sources to provide a single version of the truth, and in real time or near real time. Because right now, imagine your data moves from transactional systems to the operational systems to the analytical systems by replication, CDC, ETL, and then gets to the dashboard. It's 24 hours late, right? It comes down to the dashboard 24 hours late. What if I want to have those analytics done right away in seconds, right? You're trying to do analytics at the speed of transactions. Right? And that's what the fabric is kind of doing, right? This whole architecture, where you're trying to blend this data in from these source systems. We're not trying to blend in every data, but data which is relevant for that use case, like Customer 360, for example, and only selective data. You don't have to if you have 2 petabyte data warehouse or data lake, you don't have to really take that data, all data, and deal with that data. You may only deal with an aggregated form of data, right? And that's what the Fabric does. So, in terms of the benefits, it's more than just integration layer, right? I mean, integration is definitely an important direction, but it drives and delivers trusted data, consistent data. This is one of the biggest problems. More than 30% of data on an average in an enterprise is duplicated. And that is a nightmare because you make copies and copies of data, right? I'm sure in your organization you're making so many copies of data. Why? Because one single copy is not sufficient because your systems can't scale. And when you make copies, someone changes a copy. What happens then? Well, you have inconsistent data. And that's what is the Fabric tries to avoid that, right? By a single framework for dealing with all kinds of data, right? Trusted data is critical. But also it needs to be agile, responding quickly enough to these new use cases and business use cases. Self-service from a business perspective so that all business users can leverage data themselves for these new dashboards they're trying to work on. And self-service from IT, it's all about automation. How can I automate the platform from end to end? From end-to-end perspective, from a security, governance, integration, transformation perspective, right? Because so many different systems today, how do we blend them together, right? And this is a new framework we're dealing with. We never used to do that, right? We used to have so many different systems. But can we really provide a framework which can deal with all of these systems in a cohesive sense, right? Real-time initiatives, right, is definitely a big thing as well, right? Focusing on real-time, near real-time initiatives, as I mentioned, this exactly is the sweet spot for a Fabric-like architecture as well. Dynamic integration, right? Integrating these sources quickly enough, which obviously is another factor for customers as well. Okay, so if you look at it in a high-level perspective of what the Fabric kind of does, if you look at it on the left-hand side, you'll see all this system of transactions, system of record, system of engagements, data coming in. There could be other types of data as well. Coming into a data lake scenario, an object store, could be an Amazon, Azure, Google, or others, or a cloud data warehouse environment. And then you have the semantic layer, which has got all this composure, right? Semantic layer is providing you that layer of end-to-end framework for doing integration, transformation, governance, security, quality, and metadata and catalog building. And this whole notion is you're kind of building this whole data management kind of framework for this data, and it keeps a track of what data exists and where the locations are. You're modeling the data. And once you run some of these queries and the use cases, you automatically get all these different results you're trying to get, right? Semantic analysis, for example, Customer 360. For this case, I guess we're building these new next best actions and cross-sell, upsell, social networking analysis, and what have you. And, Fabric in a similar context could also be used for enabling data sharing, data collaboration among business users and partners as well. Some of the financial services companies, are using this kind of an architecture for sharing data with partners because, partners' data also need to be collaborated and shared as well, right? So they have built this Fabric layer so they can create a data mart kind of a model. And this data mart, which is an outshoot of this whole semantic layer, is leveraged by these partners as such as well. So you can create this virtual data mart or even a physical data mart if you wanted to build this through a semantic layer, like a data fabric. Now, this is the end-to-end reference architecture, talks about what this Fabric is all about and how this comes together. There are many different components to it. On the left-hand side, you see the data management layer, which has got the catalog, the security, governance, data processing, quality, lineage, and then you got all these different layers. And by the way, data management is a kind of a vertical bar because it goes across all these different layers, other layers like ingestion, data processing, orchestration, discovery, and access layers as well, right? So all these work end-to-end to drive those end state, right? It's not just like, okay, one component. It's not like a data preparation alone. It's not just data catalog alone. But data catalog alone is not good enough. Data preparation alone is not good enough. to doing these use cases, right? You still have to need that end-to-end scenario. And that's exactly what is being delivered. Now, you can go and build it yourselves. You can take all these components and spend a year trying to integrate yourselves, or have consultants do it, or have a solution do this as well, right? A solution which provides you that data fabric and all. So we have gotten, obviously, to a level where we have solutions exist in the market to drive a data fabric from end-to-end states. I'll talk more about the solutions a bit later. Graph engines, I want to call out, is a critical component of the fabric. And, imagine you're trying to, if you're database folks, like when you do a couple of 2 table joins in a SQL statement, it's fairly easy to do. Trying to do 20 table join or 50 table join could be a nightmare. I don't think the SQL statement will look very nice. You could run into like thousands of lines of code. No, and what about 10,000 tables? Like, forget it. I can't even do that, right? So the graph engines is all about connecting data, right? I mean, this is the newer generation of technology which enables the connections. It enables to do the shortest path of data connections. It enables that use of nodes and edges and properties to driving these connections, right? Especially complex connections. And if you look at this whole notion of graph engines, right? They are driving this real-time customer 360 today. Imagine when you're on like a Facebook or LinkedIn and Twitter, and you get these recommendations about, hey, by the way, you may be knowing this person, like, right? And those are complex kind of decisions or complex kind of a analysis being done behind the scenes, right? And graph really makes a bigger kind of those connections of data and identifies that, hey, by the way, you may know this person as a result of these connections, right? And that's exactly what this graph engine is all about. And this, we believe, is going to be a critical component in the data fabric going forward, because the fact that the number of connection points are growing and becoming more complex, especially IoT use cases, which requires a lot of these complex scenarios and what have you, right? Also, the fabric use case is not just one. Fabric can do many different use cases. I mentioned IoT, but there's also customer 360, customer intelligence, fraud detection. I know at least 2 or 3 large banks are using the data fabric to doing fraud detection, because fabric-like architecture can really drive some of these data quickly enough, which is not easy to do, as opposed to doing it through manually, right? Imagine writing code. The good thing, the bad thing with the coding is that, is the fact that it's not agile. Like, what happens if a new source comes in? Then you're stuck, right? You'll tell the developers, okay, by the way, we got this new source. Can you add this new source? Well, give us a week. We'll come back to you, right? And that dynamic nature is what the fabric is doing, right? It's agile. It's able to grow. It's future-proofed in the sense that it can be adding new sources of data quickly enough. And intelligently enough. It's understanding the data as well, right? Adaptability is very important as well. And this is where this is evolving in terms of what it does. So there are many different use cases: healthcare, financial use cases, retailers, and what have you. So Forrester did this evaluation earlier this year for about 15 of the key products in this data fabric, which provides you that end-to-end fabric solution. And if you look at it, the whole list, we got Cambridge Semantics, Cloudera, Data Robot, Denodo Technologies, Hitachi, IBM, Informatica, InfoWorks, Oracle, Click, SAP, Solix, SwingSort, Talent, and TIBCO. And, each of these have a different composure of different things. Obviously, a larger vendor technically has many different components to the solution they're offering. So as a result of this, analysis, which takes us almost 4 or 5 months in the making to analyze everything from each of these vendors, 15 vendors, but also talk to their customers, how they're implementing. This is shows you the leaders in this category and strong performers and contenders in this mix as well. And if you look at it, the features we compared were around data connectivity, pipelining, discovery, preparation, and this goes back to this whole architecture, right? We just talked about it. There are many different components and features and functionality required for doing this, and this is something which we've seen companies use as well. The quality, integration, all of these are components critical for driving success for these kind of fabric-like architecture. And all these are needing to work integrated manner as opposed to in silos to really drive the fabric. And there's also a strategy which talks about the roadmap of all these vendors, how the roadmap is aligning, a vision, and also market presence about customer installations and what have you as well. So, I guess, the recommendations, what we have when you're looking for the fabric, and by the way, we at Forrester, if you're a Forrester client, you can go to the Forrester and look at all of the fabric reports. We have a reference architecture which talks about all of these various components in more details and reports into aligning that as well. But if you're getting into this whole fabric, the real advantage of the fabric-like architecture which people are building today is it accelerates the business use cases, right? I mean, you can spend 6 months, a year trying to do this yourselves, or you can start building these fabrics a lot quicker, right? I mean, you can get value from this in weeks. In fact, some customers mention days, and it's a building block exercise. It doesn't mean that you're done with the fabric right away. It's an ongoing project where you start small and grow. You start with a few sources, and you add more sources and more sources, and that's how you go. And just to clarify, a fabric is not a lake. It's not a warehouse, right? It's just it's a semantic layer. It's got metadata. It's got all of these different policies and governance and rules. It may cache some data, but the source systems are the ones which are going to be creating all of the information that's needed, right? It focuses on real-time initiatives, which is a sweet spot for data fabric, right? Real-time is definitely the big focus in going forward. Creating a data fabric team to succeed, you got to have a fabric team, right? I mean, you can't just say, okay, I'm going to do this project and be done with it, right? You need to have enterprise architects and data architects and developers, engineers, data security people, and business analysts all working together to driving these different use case scenarios. Keep security in mind because you're dealing with a lot of sensitive data. You may be dealing with sensitive data. I know healthcare providers who are building this fabric are using this data, using the security frameworks so that you can protect this data, right? Especially PII, PHI data as well. And leverage data fabric to automate the integration and self-service and deliver self-service capabilities and also support trusted and real-time initiatives as well, right? So this is something which really what fabric solutions are helping because you can provide you this automation of driving these results, right? This is so you're going to see a lot of more fabric discussion going on in the coming years, and the real reason is because this has become a critical requirement for organizations, especially with multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, especially with the complexity of data which has grown over the years. With that, I would like to thank you and hand it over to Ben.
Noel, thank you very much for the background on data fabric and the use cases. Really appreciate the perspective about the importance of connecting data. That's, I think, one of the key things that the data fabric is all about, and that's what's really needed and different about data management requirements. So before I get started with really a deep dive into the application of the graph and semantic technologies in the data fabric, wanted to kick it off with a couple of polling questions. First one is quite broad. Are you considering a data fabric as part of your data strategy? So I'll give the folks here just a minute or two to fill that out. All right, let's move on. Let's see. Got 19 submitted. Let's see if we can get it up to 30 to 50 submitted here. 35. we got about half the group here. Let's move on and see what we have for results perspective. So over half of the poll said yes. That's highly encouraging and probably a bit of a selection bias for the folks on the call today. For those that aren't, certainly hope we can show you some insights today that might help you think maybe differently about that. And for those that aren't sure yet, hopefully we can answer some of your questions today. So a little bit more specific, do you view knowledge graphs as part of a data fabric? And if you're not doing a data fabric, is a knowledge graph a part of your overall data strategy? I'll give folks again a minute to fill that one out as well. All right, thank you everybody who submitted. We hit about 50% responding. Let's see where we landed. So very encouraging. About 70% of the folks here are viewing knowledge graph as part of their data fabric or overall what they're doing. That's really exciting to see, and something that is a very positive trend that we've been observing at Cambridge Semantics. Seemed like for a very long time, the use of knowledge graph and semantic technology was limited to people that really understood those technologies at a deep, intimate, and technical level. But now, as their capabilities are becoming more well-known and understood, we're seeing knowledge graph really surfacing as part of the broad data strategy for some very large organizations. And that's what we're going to be speaking to you all about today. So what we do at Cambridge Semantics, the graph and semantic technology and knowledge graph is part of that, is really the how we do what we do. And the what is data integration, and accelerating and automating the data delivery is part of the enterprise data fabric. And the graph technology that we have in the product, both from a metadata perspective that Noel was talking about in the semantic layer, as well as the actual graph database capability at massively parallel and OLAP scale to actually integrate the data and analyze and provide insights, is that how we deliver data as part of the data fabric. So as a motivating example, let's consider a very timely topic. Noel talked a lot about the data requirements and what organizations are thinking about in terms of COVID, and the increasing importance of integrating data, rapidly and as undisruptive a way as possible. That problem is probably not more important to anyone than our Food and Drug Administration, as they look to make approvals safely and effectively for as many new treatments, products, tests, of course, vaccines, as quickly as possible, while still maintaining safety, and maybe most importantly for effectiveness, the public's confidence in those medicines. So doing everything transparently and quickly is going to be very important. And clearly the FDA has many hundreds of data sources that they are concerned about when it comes to these types of problems. We'll look at a very simple example here that includes 5 different data sources or so of data relevant to different aspects of regulating a drug, from the data coming out of the clinical trials. Obviously, we're all waiting to see what happens with some of the phase 3 trials recently launched. There's the adverse effects of drugs that get reported throughout the life of a product in the marketplace. There's the labeling, the approval letters, and of course, patents as well. And it's not surprising that in an organization as large as the FDA, you don't have as much standardization as you might like around things like the name of a product or the disease terminologies. And so having a way to effectively link this data together is really very important and central. And so graph technology is all about making these data connections. And the semantic models are about understanding the meaning and building those relationships. in a clean way. So we'll quickly click through a very conceptual example from these data sources. So imagine we have 3 of those data sources that we want to now integrate as part of our data fabric because we want to get some insights and look at the 360-degree view of a product. So we have the patent data over on the left. It has the approval date. It has the application. We have the actual product registry with the active ingredients in the middle. And we have we have labels and other information that's more text-based describing the product. What we want to do is build a knowledge graph of metadata as well as the data that connects these sources together. So what we do is we leverage metadata, both that is provided automatically by the sources, as well as metadata that we can harvest by doing statistical profiling and analysis to automatically build a knowledge graph from the source. This is a completely automated effort. And automation is critical. If you're going to build a knowledge graph that represents all of the data points and connections across your enterprise sources, it can't be a build your model and map everything one painstaking data point at a time. It has to be automated. It needs to leverage metadata to build that graph structure. So that's what we've done here. Similarly, we build an automated knowledge graph from the drugs at FDA data set. Now, the connection point is a slightly different story. There's absolutely opportunity to automate that connection through looking at metadata, doing statistical profiling, suggesting to business users what kind of relationships they might want to create. Some might be obvious and highly automatable. Some will really require an expert to go in and make that connection. But the key takeaway is that we're automating, close to 90% or more of the overall nodes and relationships in your graph model, and the rest is done through subject matter expertise with metadata-driven machine assistance. And so that provides overall a very fast ROI with connecting data sources together. But as is often described, unstructured data makes up a very substantial part of the overall data. But what we really want is for that to participate in the knowledge graph structure itself. So here we have this text, and by running natural language processing, entity extraction, either entity-based or using machine learning algorithms, we extract facts and relationships from the text, and that becomes part of the graph structure. And so here in this simple example, we have a handful of nodes and relationships and properties, but in real-world examples, these particular graphs can get into the tens or hundreds of billions of nodes and relationships. And so having the metadata layer that can keep track of where the graph came from and how it was built, security, lineage, models, and business metadata, but together with the actual scalable graph engine that you can bring the data together, both in memory as well as virtualized combined together, is really important to do this at data fabric scale. And so tying this back to the data fabric architecture that Noel introduced a moment ago, it's not replacing the whole thing. The key aspect of the data fabric is this isn't one data lake or replacement. It's not one product or one service. Building a data fabric is about kind of pivoting or reorienting your thinking around modern data management and data architecture with the express purpose of connecting data across the business in a strategic fashion versus one-off data integrations on a use case by use case basis. And so the graph technology has a very important role to play in a very specific place in the stack here. Certainly you have data lakes, landing data, streaming data, collecting data, hardcore data cleaning and business workflows. But the graph model is about preparing data, integrating it for use, and then distributing it out rapidly to end users. And so that fits in a very specific part of the stack here towards the top. And depending on your use cases and the types of data you have in existing products, graph can do more or less. But at its core, it's providing an integrated metadata layer that for many customers is delivering actual integrated data itself. And that, in fact, in our opinion, at Cambridge Semantics is really the true power of the graph, being able to put billions of data points together into a graph run analytics, run data preparation, and feed your downstream algorithms and BI tools with that clean, connected data. And so it's, for this reason that we're clearly very excited to be recognized this year by Noel and his colleagues as a leader in this space, and principally because of the support of our customers, but really the unique use of graph technology within this group of data fabric vendors. We really use this to help make the complicated process of integrating this data much more simple, taming that complexity with semantic graph models, connecting the data together so it's more findable, more usable, so you don't run off the edge of your data as you're traversing and finding insights, and really enable whole new types of analytics, whether it's new kinds of machine learning algorithms or graph embeddings or data science that only graph makes possible, or just having a simple way to feed rectangular data into your downstream algorithms. The graph layer in the data fabric is really good at facilitating that. So what we've done at Cambridge Semantics is package this concept of using graph, metadata, and data as the integration layer for the data fabric into a modern platform that's quickly deployable in any of the major cloud environments or on-premise, that ultimately allows your business users to find, connect, and blend enterprise data. There's elements of data cataloging and metadata management. Some customers look at Anzo as a replacement or as a data catalog, but most use it as an integration with their existing data catalogs, because Anzo is principally used to blend and explore these integrated data products. But very importantly, we do this with scale and security, so that as you're bringing all this data together into a graph, you're not putting it all into one big pot and forgetting where it came from or who owns it or who can see it. All of that security comes along with the metadata and makes the whole process very secure and very scalable. And speed is of the essence, particularly in the time of COVID. If nobody had time previously to replace operational systems or data warehouses with modern data architectures and technology, they certainly don't have that time today. And so having a solution that operates as an overlay with incremental start small and grow, starting with a minimum viable solution, a minimum viable data model, and adding use cases and data as required, operating as an overlay on top of your data lakes, your data warehouses, cloud repositories, and document stores is really the preferred architecture for delivering a data fabric. Certainly if you're in your organization thinking about getting buy-in for a proof of concept or a pilot, or even just thinking how do you explore some of this in your free time, you want to have an approach that is incremental, fast and lightweight, and that can be done quickly as you start to prove it out. But ultimately, enterprise scale, the ability to deliver this capability for hundreds and thousands of data sets, is really, really important. And only recently was the graph and semantic technology available to do that. And we're obviously very excited working with our customers who are doing that today. So specifically, why graph data models and semantic technology for the data fabric? Why is that so important, and what advantage does it bring? Certainly over relational technologies or keeping everything in NoSQL databases. And it's really about simplifying and addressing complexity. So the example that you see kind of in the abstract on the right there is an actual data model from a real use case, real data fabric use case with one of our customers, where they were integrating a handful of data sources, running natural language processing, running some machine learning algorithms, integrating some public taxonomies, providing some human input into the problem, so reviewing and curating facts and relationships in the data, and then performing various kinds of analytics. Each one of those nodes is a type of data, and an arc is a possible relationship, and the colors kind of represent sub-models or subgraphs within the overall knowledge graph. And so, that complexity is there. And so the graph really tames that complexity, enables you to address unanticipated questions, deals with unstructured data. Very importantly, allows you to reshape the graph on the fly and present customized and tailored views to the business, bring in different data sources on the fly. So even if you build a robust data pipeline for your top 10 data sources, then a week after go live, source 11 comes on board, the graph model can help you accommodate that rapidly and out of band of a long development cycle. And then, of course, enterprise scale is critical as well. So graph is important, but the question is, which graph data platform for your enterprise data fabric? There are many aspects of the data fabric that we've been talking about here, but if you really truly want to integrate data at large scale, so you're dealing with tens or hundreds of billions of nodes and relationships, a graph database that's capable of OLAP data integration at large scale is going to be really central to the data fabric. And so that's an element that is fairly unique to the Anzo and AnzoGraph platform. However, there are many really excellent graph products out there that specialize in certain kinds of graph algorithms that have an OLTP design point that can also be useful to you as part of the data fabric. So the key thing about graph, it's just like relational databases. You're not going to have one, you're going to have many depending upon the use case. So it's really important to understand the design point across the different types of use cases that you have. But in order for any new technology to rapidly gain adoption, it has to be usable. It has to be approachable, not just by the early adopters, the hardcore developers, the folks that have been living and breathing semantic and graph technology since the early World Wide Web conferences in the early 2000s, but the broad group of data scientists, data architects, business analysts who really are interested in graph, but just really want the benefits it provides, but don't want to have to learn Sparkle or Cypher or GraphQL or any of these other languages. So what we've done with the Anzo platform for the data fabric is make it very easy for users of different skill sets to take advantage of these graph capabilities. So allow you to onboard data, which could be ETLing it from a relational database, could be onboarding unstructured data, could simply be loading raw data from a data lake, harvesting all that metadata as part of the knowledge graph, building a graph model automatically, and then bringing all that data together in memory so we can blend it, integrate it, and then provide access. And access to the fabric is clearly one of the most important aspects of it, and end users and data scientists, most of them are not going to learn a graph query language, so being able to access it over protocols like JDBC or REST or having a user-friendly interface where they can pose queries simply by clicking around, that's part of the platform as well. And so the platform deploys as an overlay technology. It can run in any of the major cloud environments, AWS, GCP, Azure, or on-prem on platforms like OpenShift and Red Hat. Can be and with Kubernetes is the common operational layer. The various elements of the fabric can scale up on demand as required. So you want to connect in 10 data sources from a number of different databases. Kubernetes spins up the hardware, loads the data directly into memory, and allows users to query on demand. So it's a very rapid iterative process. You don't have to right size a single graph database for your fabric. We use Kubernetes to spin up compute and bring the data to that compute wherever it may live. And that entire process is driven by what's called active metadata that's used to operationalize data integration, to operationalize data management, and provide lineage and visibility and security into the end-to-end process. And because the whole system is based on the semantic web standards, it's very open and interoperable. You can plug in different visualization tools, you can extract the metadata, you can hook it into data catalogs, you can take all the data out and put it somewhere else. So it's not another data silo, it's an overlay with metadata that's highly interoperable. We'll spend the last few minutes here, talking about some of the real data fabric leaders. It's always nice to be recognized by Forrester as a leader from a technology perspective, but the real leaders in the space of data fabric are, our customers and the customers of others in the data fabric wave, who are really taking the risk with their careers and their projects and their customers, which in many cases are patients who need care, families whose financial futures rest on the data that's being properly managed. And these leaders are taking new technology like data fabric and putting it into use to try to make the lives and outcomes better for their companies, their shareholders, and their customers. And so we really want to thank them for their support and working through the challenges that come with adopting early technology, but also understanding the great benefits that they're realizing to the adoption of graph and semantics as a data fabric strategy. So I'll just speak about a couple of these use cases at a high level here, and one in a little bit more detail, and then we'll take some time for questions. So each one of these use cases that we see on the screen here are they have many commonalities. They all involve multiple different data sources that needed to be aligned on common data models to integrate the data together, and then have a multitude of different use cases associated with them. Some users just want to search for some documents or some data and take it away. Others want to create an analysis that spans across multiple different sources. But they all are taking on the different flavors of their own industry. So in the automotive industry, there's an urgency to look across multiple sources, including manufacturing and research data, to build what's called a digital twin that is really a semantic representation of the inner workings of real world things. So the machines, the manufactured components, the manufactured products, connecting it all together with semantics so that you get optimizations in the end-to-end supply chain, but also insights for analytics and business improvements. Many of the customers here are working to improve their data management because of regulatory pressure across multiple industries. In many cases, they have to deliver data with increasing transparency as well as in speed, as well as increasing standardization. So the drug regulatory bodies, both in the United States and Europe, are increasingly asking that products, patents, filings all get made with very standardized naming of substances and other terminologies. And so to be able to take all of your legacy data, align it to those terminologies, and then meet the reporting deadlines is really a massive challenge. And so by investing in a data fabric, companies like Merck and Germany are able to do that in a much more strategic fashion, but along the way, they're building this integrated data asset they can use for different kinds of analytics. So I'll take a quick look in depth at a data fabric from one of our financial services customers here. Noel mentioned earlier that banks are using data fabrics for fraud because of their ability to rapidly connect all this data together and get the insights there faster. This is a very similar example where hedge funds under increased regulatory scrutiny from the SEC have to show increasing diligence and technical capability with respect to how they're monitoring for insider trading and other compliance related issues. And so the types of questions that a hedge fund might have to ask is, how frequently does an employee communicate with a non-employee during a period of time? These aren't questions that they just decide to ask. They're triggered by alerts. And so when they're doing an investigation, they then start to dive down and look into these things. But if you think about all these various questions, the data sources behind these requirements are vast. They're all over the place. They're changing all the time. So how do you create a fabric that actually integrates all this together to be able to ask these questions and automatically raise alerts? Is quite a challenge. And so when you think about it, the data sources are varied. Some are structured, some are unstructured. Many of the data sources are coming in on a time basis. So you might have daily updates to trading data, hourly updates of employee movement, end of day prices are important as well. But then of course you have reference data, which in many ways is the thread that makes up the data fabric. It's the reference data, the common entities, the common models, the terminologies that allow us to actually link together across these different sources. So reference data is a key part of the knowledge graph at the core of the data fabric. And so to create this, you have a graph model that describes the environment. Concepts like individual, event, electronic communication. And so the data coming from these different sources on a near real-time basis populates the knowledge graph on a very large scale. 1 year of data has tens of billions of RDF triples in the knowledge graph that represents all the data points behind every trade, the metadata behind electronic communications, all linked together in a near real-time knowledge graph so that users get alerts, can do searches, perform investigations with sub-second or low second response times all powered by an MPP knowledge graph under the covers to allow this sort of activity to happen. It's quite a powerful concept. So thanks everybody for your attention today. I hope this was informative, and for some of those no's in the audience about Fabric or knowledge graph, I hope we maybe convinced you to take a look at some of the capabilities, both of what Cambridge Semantics has to offer as well as the market in general. There's some really good offerings out there related to knowledge graph that are worth your time to have a further look at. And so what I might do now is just take a look and see if we have time for a couple of questions. We will, of course, try to review all the questions offline and respond with answers to all of them. Here's a question from an audience member. How extensive is your ETL capabilities? That's a great question, and perhaps I'll answer a slightly different one, which is how extensive are the data onboarding capabilities? How does data get into the knowledge graph? The truth of the matter is that the graph ultimately behind an enterprise data fabric is too big and complex to ETL every single data point. We're going to bring some data and pre-position it in storage so that it's there, data on deck, ready to bring into the knowledge graph when we need it. Other data we're going to bring into the knowledge graph at the time someone logs in the morning and is ready to do their work. Other data might not get into the knowledge graph until at the time when the user actually runs a query. And so any given knowledge graph is actually going to include a variety of these methods of populating the in-memory graph. And so that's highly extensible. We connect directly to different sources, whether APIs, JDBC endpoints, RESTful endpoints, loading data from document repositories. But ultimately, it's the extensibility of the underlying component. So if there's a system that we don't yet connect to, we have the ability to and work with our partners to write connectors as required. But it's interesting, though, when you going back to the architecture of the data fabric, the actual connecting to source systems is going to be generally done by other components of the fabric lower down the stack. And then the knowledge graph and the semantic layer will have the ability to read from a more of a common stage storage format. Here's a couple of really good ones here. Noel mentioned that an ongoing data fabric team is needed. How would the team size compare to the size of teams needed to support enterprise data warehouse or master data management systems and processes? That's an excellent question. The team size is a hard one, but perhaps I can just comment briefly about sort of the nature of the skill sets. The good thing is that even if you adopt semantic and graph technology for your data fabric, you don't have to go out and hire a whole new set of teams. It's more about centralizing an approach to the data fabric. So building out a center of excellence around using knowledge graph technology, about standards for modeling, how do you integrate data sources together, how do you secure data, what are the cloud security policies when you're installing a data fabric at scale in your cloud. But all of this is going to leverage the existing teams that you already have. It might just be about having an overlay committee across your data management teams whose focus is on the connectivity of data in the fabric across multiple sources. I think we have time for one more here. Where and how does the enterprise data fabric fit into the AI ML workflows in enterprises? And perhaps why don't I have us wrap up by having Noel answer this question.
I mean, AI machine learning obviously is getting into all of the layers of the fabric itself, right? And if you read the Forrester report on this, we believe the AI machine learning will be embedded within the fabric layers, whether you're doing ingestion, transformation, governance, security, integration, quality, all these things, right? And the whole notion is to make this more adaptive intelligence built into the fabric, so it knows what data exists, what data needs to be integrated, what data needs to be leveraged. and we're getting on this journey, right? I mean, it's not that, we are done, right? I mean, or any other vendors are done. It's kind of evolving, right? And AI machine learning, as you know, in the general sense, is obviously evolving as well. So we'll see obviously a lot more innovation in the coming years, but certainly today we already are seeing innovation which exists in the fabric with AI machine learning. And so, you can build these models. If you already build some of these models, you could still integrate with them with that fabric as well. The good thing with fabric, it's very customizable as well. It's not that you got a rigid fabric which can't really expand or cannot extend itself, right? So the good thing with the fabric is like model, because there are too many different layers involved, you can actually make it more flexible, customizable as well. So if you're already working on certain models of AI machine learning, those could be part of this whole fabric as well. But the fabric itself has a lot of AI machine learning capabilities today, as I mentioned, which could be leveraged to accelerate those use cases.
Thanks very much, Noel. And again, thanks for everyone for spending an hour with us today. I know that we all have a lot of pressures to be in front of our screens, listening to people talk on our computer speakers or headphones. So again, appreciate it. In the resources tab on in the application, you should be able to find a couple of links to learn more about data fabric and graph technology. And for everyone at Cambridge Semantics and Forrester, thanks very much for joining us today.